love the mall. So we thought, well, if people love the mall, if they love Frank, let's just go back to Willamette, but it's going to be 16 years after the original outbreak.
So the first thing we did is we went back to our roots. We went back to the original game and looked at what made that great. Bringing back Frank was really important to us. Wrapping up his story, but not ending his story, was really important. It's zombies, and zombie killing is our main part of our game.
What the fans love about Dead Rising is it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's fun, and they like killing lots of zombies.
Turn Dead Rising 4 into an over-the-top piece of popcorn entertainment that captures the series' best elements.
Take it. The world needs Frank West.
The Dead Rising series, renowned for its unique gameplay elements, memorable story and quotes, intriguing characters, and was overall well received as one of the best zombie games of this generation, garnering not one, but two, but three separate sequels following the original release almost 10 years later. And yet, the Dead Rising series has been extremely silent ever since its latest release, Dead Rising 4, back in 2016. And today I'm going to be exploring what made the Dead Rising series so great, and what led to its inevitable downfall. So what made Dead Rising so special? From a basic standpoint, the gameplay is just really satisfying. I know the controls for the original Dead Rising, and maybe even Dead Rising 2 at this point, can feel dated. However, they do their purpose good enough and have left a significant stain on the gaming industry in terms of the zombie aspect. The gameplay may be fun and easy to use. However, what made Dead Rising truly shine in the gameplay aspect is what it had to entail. For example, you are on a time limit. Not many games force you to have a time limit. Usually they let you free roam for as long as you want and however long you wish. However, in the signature Dead Rising formula is that the entire game or experience is on a time limit, and you have only a limited amount of time to experience the full game. Not only was this unique in the gaming market at the time, but it also set the precedent for consequences in terms of a player standpoint. When you went back and tried to get a bad ending, you felt awful watching the characters in misery. Your actions, your choices, your decisions led to this horrific outcome. Alternatively, you tried your best to get a good ending and you got one. Or in the case of Dead Rising 1, you got a bittersweet cliffhanger type ending, but hey, at least everyone's alive, kind of. Players would ask themselves, what happens if I let the time run out? What happens if I don't do any of the missions and the time runs out? It got people coming back to the game to get different endings, good and bad, and that was obviously a really valuable replayability feature. Secondly, and probably its most popular feature, the playable protagonist has the ability to pick up almost anything on the map and use it as a weapon to defend yourself against a zombie horde. This can range from generic fire axe and sledgehammers to even entire benches and even tables. You could even throw food at some zombies. Like, the opportunities were limitless. And as the games went on, they just expanded on that concept, coming up with more and more ingenious ways to improve on the formula. While Dead Rising 2 and 3 made you feel like a beast using these weapons, Dead Rising 1 did not have any of that element, and these weapons just seemed like you could grab whatever you could to defend yourself, rather than, go on a killing spree. And that brings me on to the next popular feature of the Dead Rising series, its atmosphere. Dead Rising 1 is set in the Willamette Mall, where a zombie outbreak hidden away to the world has just broken loose. Frank West is a photojournalist who was sent there by helicopter for a few days in order to investigate the sources claiming that there's a zombie outbreak occurring. What made Dead Rising 1 in particular feel special was the fact that the more humorous sides were toned down quite tremendously. in favor of atmosphere, building tense, suspenseful, and oftentimes even horrifying environments. Survivors would be everywhere and anywhere, trapped, fighting off zombies. You get the idea. However, there was another branch of survivors, and another signature aspect of the Dead Rising series called psychopaths.
This is my store! You came to vandalize my store, huh? Not on my watch!
Essentially, these are survivors or members of a military force, the list goes on, that have lost their sanity and broken down into a hostile enemy / boss fight that the protagonist needs to take down. These psychopath boss fights were oozing with personality, charm, and wit. For example, one boss fight can make it feel humorous and funny, another fight can make you feel creepy and disturbed, and another one can even generate sympathy for the person you took down.
My granddaughter. She was done in by those damn zombies. When I heard her scream, I just lost it. Everything went white suddenly. The war, it wasn't over. Not for me. It never ended.
It was one of the most popular and most well-received aspects of the Dead Rising series formula, and as the games went on, this formula seemed to expand even more and gain even more traction. And one last thing that made the Dead Rising series so unique is the protagonists. As mentioned earlier, Frank West is a photojournalist. His unique trait is that he has a camera that he can use to take pictures of anything, whether that be horrific zombie scenarios, porn. No, I'm not joking. There's even some games where you can take selfies with zombies, as a funny moment. This is a trait that never ever reoccurs in any other Dead Rising protagonist, excluding Chuck Green in the Case West case, as Frank West is there with him, and obviously if you're playing as Chuck and you need to photograph something, the game has to supply you with a camera, but you get the idea. Speaking of Chuck Green's unique ability is that he's able to access a workbench and combine weapons together to form weapons of mass destruction. Not only this, he also has a daughter named Katie who was infected during the Las Vegas outbreak. And again, this is another unique aspect that doesn't return in any of the Dead Rising games, where you need to constantly supply a survivor Zombrix. And the last playable Dead Rising protagonist is Nick Ramos of Dead Rising 3. Essentially an upgrade to Chuck Green, Nick Ramos can do what Chuck can do, but in every way better. He can combine more destructive weapons, he can expand on combined weapons, and all the while he could do it on the fly, because he's a mechanic, it makes sense. However, Nick is also immune to the zombie virus, which gives a canonical explanation as to why the character doesn't turn into a zombie when they get bitten by a zombie in the game. Nick Ramos almost goes through immense character development as the story goes on, going from scared and quite cowardly honestly, to a full stone-cold killer determined to save his friends and family no matter what the cost. There are many more aspects of the Dead Rising series, such as the survivors, the watch quests, and even the cosmetic costumes. But these are all self-explanatory, and obviously they help benefit the game in their own way. These aspects, especially the popular ones, are what drove Dead Rising into a massive state of popularity among the zombie franchise, with each game expanding and improving on the formula set before it, or even trying entirely new things to see how fans react, without straying away from the formula too much. However, you may have noticed I haven't mentioned Dead Rising 4 in these popular futures and well-received futures kind of list. There's a reason for that. Dead Rising 4 is the reason why Dead Rising is no longer around. In interviews for Dead Rising 4, the developers are so up their own arse about Dead Rising 4, calling it the zombie game on shelves, calling their game amazing and groundbreaking that old and new fans are going to absolutely love it, when in reality, old and new fans hate it, despise it, including myself. In some cases, the developers even outright lied in their interviews. For example, in one interview, the developer states that Frank West's story didn't need to be restarted or rewiped, but it just needed to be expanded without ending the story. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure killing off the main character, Frank West, the definitive Dead Rising protagonist that almost everyone knows and loves, I'm pretty sure that's ending his story. Correct me if I'm wrong. And don't try and use the excuse that they made a Frank Rising DLC zombie bullcrap. Speaking of that, don't you think it's funny that you had to pay to experience the full ending of the main story? You had to pay for a DLC expansion just to see what happened to Frank. Hell, I don't even consider that's DLC canon at all. I still firmly say that Frank West heroically died in that city, and that Vicky picked up the torch and carried on his legacy. Like, it's a way better ending than just, oh, Frank's a sentient zombie, he's special now. It just completely spits on everything that came before it. Dead Rising was a game about surviving. Or if not surviving, at least doing well enough to keep those around you safe. Yet Dead Rising 4 completely disregards this entire factor in the favour of, haha, fans like the zombie killing part. I understand that putting an entirely new team on a project they've never worked with before is something that just needs to happen from a business perspective. However, you can clearly tell that this team just did no research outside of playing Dead Rising 1 for about an hour and playing Dead Rising 3 for 4 hours. There's just so many instances where you can clearly see they barely paid attention to the Dead Rising 1, and I don't even think they even give a chance to Dead Rising 2, because there's no mention of Chuck Green, or even Nick Ramos for that matter, and he's the one who created the apparent cure. So what was the point of making us go through the entirety of Dead Rising 3, keeping Nick alive to get that cure out there, if the whole purpose of that game was just made redundant by one sentence? Dead Rising 4 is just a disgrace to the entire franchise. It's like the Ugly Duckling, except the Ugly Duckling is a piece of crap no one likes, and he's just an idiot. Now let's go through this game into more thorough detail. Dead Rising 4 completely removed or made redundant most of the series' signature features that everyone adored it for. My first example being the time limit. Now don't get me wrong, I can't argue with a sandbox mode. That mode is specifically designed for you to mess around and have fun in. For example, in Dead Rising 2 spin-off, Off the Record, there is a sandbox mode with challenges and stuff to do in a sandbox environment with no time limit. That is completely fine. However, when you base the entire main campaign story in a setting with no time limit, there's just no incentive to experiment with endings. There's no questions being asked like, what happens if I do this? Or what happens if I do that? There's no good or bad ending to aim for. The path is predetermined no matter what you do. And there's no real intensity to the situation you're in. There's no incentive to rush. There's no panic. There's no rush to get everyone you know and care about to safety. The second thing they completely removed is psychopaths. Now I remember hearing about this, and this was without a doubt the most controversial decision I've ever seen the developers make at the time, before the game even dropped. Instead, psychopaths were completely replaced by maniacs. Enemy NPC boss fight things that weren't even made original and were just copy-paste of Frank, just swinging a weapon around, and you just press X until it dies. This completely wiped out any emotion, humour, wit, and any of the other redeeming qualities that psychopaths had in the previous installments, and replaced them with carbon copy-paste boss fights that were just completely uninteresting. What's worse is that even recycled boss music from previous installments. It's honestly appalling. Survivors weren't even present in the game until a year later when the expanded edition came out. And even then, you didn't guide the survivor, you just followed them to the safe house. It just felt so redundant and boring and just so tedious. There was no charm to it. There's nothing fun about survivor missions. Okay, so I hear you say, what about the main story? It's gotta be good if Frank West is in the story, right? Hate to disappoint you, but no, it's not. Frank West's original voice actor just doesn't even make an appearance in this game. As much as he wanted to, Capcom Vancouver completely denied him his right to return, and instead replaced him with someone who's, no offense to the actor, just completely awful. He just does not fit Frank West at all. I just can't understand how a spin-off after Record can absolutely crap on a whole game in terms of reintroducing Frank West. And even then, Frank Rising just served as damage control because of how outraged the fans were at the ending. The only redeeming quality I can even think of when it comes to Dead Rising 4 is its gameplay. It's incredibly simplified, but it's easily accessible for newcomers, so at the very least I can give that a pass. It strayed very far from the original formula, but it's a good entrance for newcomers, and I can respect that. However, it completely massacred what made Frank West unique. Frank didn't spit out one-liners every 5 seconds like Chuck Green does. And even then, Chuck Green at least had entertaining one-liners to spit out. And it wasn't cringeworthy listening to him talk. This game is such a popular example of character assassination that I'm begging you, if you study game design in any formula, please, when you're given an example of character assassination, how to butcher a classic, please use this game, Dead Rising 4's Frank West, as an example. Whatever charm and personality Frank had in Dead Rising 1 and Dead Rising 2 Case West was just completely gone, in favour of, haha, look how hip and cool we are, hashtag Frank is back, just in time for Christmas too, wow. I could go on how terrible Dead Rising 4 is, I really could, but I'm going to sum it up for you. Dead Rising 4 just completely spits on everything that made the originals unique. From the compelling, gripping storylines, to the different endings, to the psychopaths, to the unique and engaging characters, and how they interact with the protagonist. And even the protagonist at Dead Rising 4 isn't perfect, they just butchered him. So I hear you asking, how the hell did Dead Rising 4 lead to the absolute catastrophe end of the Dead Rising series? As you can imagine, fans of the original Dead Rising, myself included, were absolutely appalled at this game's release. No matter how many gaming outlets and how many gaming sources tried to suck up to this game, giving it 9s and 10s across the board, nothing could save it from the massive horde of complaints, videos, and even articles written on this game. Dead Rising 4 was an absolute catastrophe, and it was honestly doomed from the start, with a majority of the reasons being that they just completely butchered Frank West. It wasn't even that the game was bad, it's just how the meme literally personified, look how they massacred my boy. That's literally what people thought of Dead Rising 4. They looked at Frank West and said, look how they massacred my boy, and that was literally what the main consensus of complaints were. On top of all the other points I've mentioned, like just outright spitting on what made the other installments special, the game just overall received mixed reviews, with the majority of gaming outlets trying to suck up the game to keep the game in a positive light. But no matter how hard they tried, Dead Rising 4 fell into the pit of mediocrity and was just overall terrible. With such a harsh response and obviously bad feedback to Dead Rising 4, you can imagine how ass the sales were for this game. Even with the update in Christmas of 2017, where they attempted to try and fix Dead Rising 4 by adding all the features that fans were upset and wanted back, such as the survivors as I've mentioned earlier. However, the famous term, too little too late, can be applied here. This isn't like No Man's Sky where you can make the game fantastic despite, lying to your audience. This is a game that failed in a matter of weeks, and no matter how many times you try to milk that cow, people are not going to be interested in it. If I hear an Xbox One exclusive that's absolutely terrible, and I'm a PlayStation player, why would I pick up an expanded version of it if the reputation is so terrible? Literally, all you do is type Dead Rising 4 on YouTube and just the first few results are just bashing the game and how it's terrible and how it's a disgrace, much like this one. Because of this, sales absolutely tanked, and Capcom Vancouver was in a really tricky spot. Apparently a few months after 2017, or December 2017, apparently Capcom Vancouver were planning on Dead Rising 5. However, in 2018 it was revealed that the company went defunct. Not by their own choice, however, but because the initial company Capcom saw it as a wise business move. And if I'm being honest, I think that was the wise thing to do. Now granted, it's not good, obviously, seeing all those people lose their jobs, and that's a terrible outcome of that decision. However, I feel like Capcom Vancouver lost their touch after Dead Rising 3, and that it was kind of just putting the company out of its misery. I mean, what else were Capcom Vancouver known for outside of Dead Rising? However, that doesn't change the fact that this essentially means that Dead Rising is officially dead. It's kind of scary saying that, because at one point this series was beloved by hundreds, millions even. Even Corey Kenshin, someone I never expected to even play this game, absolutely adores Dead Rising 1. So to see this beloved series, especially from a personal standpoint, come to such a tragic and honestly leave on a bad note, it's just heartbreaking. It's just a shame, because if the developers actually tried with Dead Rising 4 instead of rushing this game out for the holidays and just overall disregarding what made the game special, maybe they would have had a chance. Maybe Dead Rising 5 would have been a thing. Maybe we would have actually got to see the different storylines that weren't explored. Maybe we would have got a better game than Dead Rising 4. But no matter what I say here, we can't change the past, and well, I guess we can officially say that Dead Rising is no more. The only time I can think of ever seen any mention of Dead Rising from here on out is in the Marvel vs. Capcom games, or in just Capcom crossover games in general, since Frank West tends to appear quite often in those games. However, outside of crossovers, I just think this is an end to what was once a fantastic franchise. Was it all Dead Rising 4's fault? Probably not. But I'd say it was the majority of the reason why Capcom Vancouver kind of tanked in terms of value and obviously lost out on a lot of money. I would say Dead Rising 3 kind of concerned fans with how drastic the direction was, but I wouldn't say it had any negative impact on the series purely because it stayed loyal to its formula. It tried a lot of new things. Although it scrapped the entire moral aspect of the game, it still kept the game fresh and consistent with different features and new ones, even updated ones such as the crafting mechanic. But alas, this closes the book on what was once a fantastic franchise, the pinnacle of zombie games. Much like the Dead Island series, this game, we just cannot expect to see another installment of it at all. So rest in peace, Dead Rising. You were a great franchise until the very end, where you kind of, released Dead Rising 4 and it was terrible. Thank you for watching this Dead Rising video. This is honestly a really touchy subject for me, since Dead Rising was a big part of my childhood. So when I looked up information for this video and found out that Capcom Vancouver, the people who made Dead Rising initially, were defunct back in 2018, I really felt heartbroken. It was just such a shame realizing that my favorite franchise in terms of zombies is just completely gone, doomed to join the depths of the Dead Island era where we'd never see another installment ever again. But regardless, if you did enjoy this video, please make sure to leave a like. I worked really hard on this video. And if you're still here, make sure to subscribe. I'd love to have you. But yeah, thank you for watching and stay tuned, I guess.